so many of these companies in the United States are essentially sitting on advisory boards that are non-existent or have one or two advisors on them. They could be bigger. It would help the company, and it would be a way to bring diverse voices in at the board level. And then similarly with their governing boards, although, governing boards, admittedly, it's a different beast than an advisory board, but those empty independent director seats or unfilled observer seats, there's no reason why, if there was an efficient resource that those companies could tap into, there's no reason why they couldn't start to bring diverse talent into those seats.
Hey, it's Samantha Hartley of the Profitable Joyful Consulting Podcast. This season, we have been talking about money, and I want women to have more money and more power and more access. And one of the ways that we do that is by getting what's called a seat at the table. And in this particular episode, we're talking about a seat at the board table, at the executive level, like where the decisions are made, where influence can be made. How do women get a seat at the table for the board of directors? How is that done? A lot of this is done in the kind of old boys network of where like somebody has a buddy and he calls his friend, and a lot of this stuff goes back to where you went to college and who was in your fraternity. Well, things are changing now, right? And nowadays it's more popular, the idea of having diversity at the top levels, but guess what? It isn't just a good idea and good for the optics. It turns out that actually companies perform better when they have more diversity, on the boards that are serving them, and also in the top leadership of companies. So that, I don't know, maybe it doesn't come as news to you. I wasn't really surprised by that. I was like, duh, it seems pretty obvious. Nevertheless, we see that kind of thing happening at the very tippy top because of companies are being forced to do that in the Fortune 500 and apparently to get on the NASDAQ now. But a lot of companies that are new and emerging like have opportunities to bring more women and people of color onto their boards, but like, how would they do that? So from our side, like, what are those boards? Where are they? What's the compensation structure like? How would I find that? And how do I even go about like entering into like a deal to do that? And from companies' sides, like, where are all these qualified candidates who could be on our boards? So my guest today has an organization which is basically matchmaking those companies and those really highly qualified, diverse candidates. So I'm going to introduce you to her, and I really want you to listen for, like, is this something that's interesting to you? Like, do you feel like this is a 1 year or 5 year or 10-year goal for you to be on more boards? And I think you're going to just learn a lot about the ins and outs, and a little bit about the feistiness that she and I both have for like seeing things change and becoming more of a fair place to play for all of us concerned. Cool. Breen Sullivan is a career general counsel lawyer for high growth tech companies and the founder of The Fourth Floor, a market network on a mission to close the gender power, wealth, and funding gap by diversifying boardrooms and cap tables. The Fourth Floor online community and on-demand talent marketplace includes a board seat exchange, private investment club, job board, and membership community. I'm a member. The Fourth Floor, along with its over 800 ecosystem companies, 1,450 plus board-ready women, and 100 plus women-led funds and angel investors, is breaking the systemic barriers that contribute to the inequities in the startup ecosystem and company boardrooms. I mean, isn't this like a room you want to be in? So I highly encourage you to check out The Fourth Floor and enjoy my conversation with Breen. So Breen, how about you share with us someone who you have helped with The Fourth Floor, what was going on with them when they came to you, how you helped them, and then like what the result of that was?
Absolutely. So one great example would be to talk about a board candidate. So this is someone, so in our world, our mission is to get more women on boards, cap tables, funded, and writing checks. So focusing on the part where we're getting women onto for-profit boards. On the candidate side of our marketplace, it's women. And it's women really along the spectrum. So we do have a minimum threshold in order to be deemed qualified to join us as a board candidate member, so that a woman can initiate or advance a for-profit board career. Those criteria are basically at least 10 years of professional experience, and the woman has to have reached a requisite level of seniority or held a leadership position in order to qualify to then join us as a candidate. And then that woman does not need to have had any previous board experience. That woman might have had previous board experience. I would say just kind of a sample, like standard middle of the road candidate. This is someone who probably is about 15 to 20 years into their professional career. They are maybe, they could be a general counsel of a company. They could be a chief marketing officer. They maybe they've advised a smaller startup in the past. Maybe they've served on a not-for-profit board, but now they really want to get involved in the, when it comes to for-profit board service. And so we're just a really great starting place for that person to get to know CEOs and founders of high growth, early stage to small startup size companies that are building out their boards, that are looking for advisors to take advisory board member seats, or looking for independent directors. And sometimes our CEOs and founders are looking for observers as well as independent directors. And then we also do have like a sort of pre-advisor opportunity, which we call mentor sponsor. So when that woman comes in, she typically comes to a platform tour. We get to know her, show her how the platform works. She signs up, goes through onboarding, which is, creating a really detailed board candidate profile, sets preferences. Those preferences are really important because we have AI-powered technology that is looking at who this woman is, what her experience is, what her background is, and then, what she's seeking, what her preferences are. And that helps to guide the board opportunities that are suggested as a potential match for that woman. That woman can also sign up and come to a brainstorming session. My co-founder and I will always meet with board candidate members we set aside time every week, and then just kind of handhold that candidate through the process of really thinking about who they are as a candidate, what their strengths are, where they bring value, where they should target, and help them search and filter in our board marketplace to find those opportunities. And then finally, we recommend they come to our board bootcamp, which is a cornerstone bit of programming we do every 6 weeks or so. It's 2 hours long. It's very substantive. We have a lot of workbooks, templates, resources, legal documents, sample board bios, stuff like that to really help that woman make sure that she has the right tools to feel empowered to, put herself out there as a candidate.
Amazing. So who is someone who has kind of gone through that process, and how did it turn out for them?
So right now there's over 1,500 women who have gone through that process, which is very exciting. Many of those women have had a lot of success finding advisory, pre-advisory, and some of those women have found governing board seats as well. Unfortunately, because we are not a recruiter, like that isn't our model, we are not present when the placements occur. So we rely on our members to tell us. So we get a lot of anecdotal stories back from our members on both sides of the marketplace about, the success stories. So then we have some that we'll highlight on our website if anyone, wants to read more. But it's worked out very well between, with some founders finding multiple advisors and directors and investors. And then, on the candidate side, some women finding opportunities with multiple companies.
Amazing. So it sounds like they have to be very high level to get these positions. So is this a lot of people who are ex-corporate and had fairly like C-level or senior level positions with those companies? Yeah.
So like I said, definitely out of the 1,500 or so, it is a range. But the bare bones, minimum level of experience is 10 years of professional experience, and then at least VP level at a larger corporation, SVP or EVP at a smaller company. And then also depending on the industry, it's not always those titles, but kind of equivalent levels of seniority. So that would be the floor. And then out of those 1,500 plus women, I would say it really runs the gambit from there all the way up to C-suite officers of public companies, and women who are currently sitting on public company boards. So we have a pretty wide range. I mean, there's just really, it's unbelievable, the board candidates that are in our ecosystem. So many of them are extremely impressive. I mean, all of them are extremely impressive, but it's important to be clear that it certainly is a range. So we want to, our focus is, yes, getting women onto for-profit boards, but also really transforming that board candidate pipeline so that we're meeting women where they're at, assuming they're 10 years into their career and, they've had some success professionally. So we can find wherever they, where that opportunity might be, where it's the first opportunity for them. So we can get them in the door and, over a period of time, they can continue to grow and advance their board career, but then leverage that to help them, negotiate for a raise at work or get promoted, be seen as strategic and not just tactical. Because we really, that's a lot of what's behind creating the fourth floor. We really see it as a gap. And if women can access this and tap into it, it's a strategic resource for them to advance in their careers so that they do become the C-level officer of a public company.
Right. So if we just step back a second and look at what was the origin of the fourth floor?
So the origin of the fourth floor, and my background is as a lawyer, general counsel for high growth tech startups, to be specific. And what I noticed from that sort of unique vantage point, it was that many companies tended to not make full use of corporate advisory boards, even if it could have been valuable for that company, given the industry the company was in. Similarly, I noticed lots of companies would have empty independent director seats year over year that would go unfilled. And there's a lot of reasons why. I think one big one is that what happens is when a company is looking to fill an independent director seat, they don't know where to go. They look to their immediate network. They ask the investors, if they've taken on a funding round, who the investor knows. But there's a lot of issues with that, because then is that independent director really an independent director? If it's coming through that investor.
Right.
But also, the other huge problem is that then you have that, it's the who you know.
Yeah.
It's this small little world, which is
right.
Why that pipeline is not diverse in the first place. So, and then of course, another reason why companies have these unfilled independent director seats is because it's expensive. If they have to go to a recruiter and pay a recruiter fees to, put in the time and the effort to give them that slate of candidates and fill that spot. So I think for all those reasons, a lot of companies, if they don't have the budget to allocate for a recruiter, a white glove service, and they don't really know where to turn when it comes to their own personal network, then, it's inefficient and expensive to try and fill the seat. So they go unfilled. And then this is bad for the companies.
Right.
And it's bad for the candidate pipeline because there aren't nearly as many board opportunities out there as there should be. So anyway, from my vantage point, I saw that. I saw, okay, there's something happening here. That all of these, so many of these companies in the United States are essentially sitting on advisory boards that are non-existent or have one or two advisors on them. They could be bigger. It would help the company, and it would be a way to bring diverse voices in at the board level. And then similarly with their governing boards, although, governing boards, admittedly, it's a different beast than an advisory board, but those empty independent director seats or unfilled observer seats, there's no reason why, if there was an efficient resource that those companies could tap into, there's no reason why they couldn't start to bring diverse talent into those seats.
Right.
So I saw that as a general counsel, and that was a lot of the idea.
Oh, well, I love that idea. So it's matchmaking for a certain kind of company. So obviously the Coca-Colas of the world can afford to pay recruiters to do this. And then really, really small companies are going to have maybe friends and family advisors and things like that. So what's the kind of profile of the companies that you're targeting? Who are in between those?
Right. So, okay, well, that's also a great question. I think a lot of people, when they hear board director or board seat, they think of two things. They think of not-for-profits, and then they think of large Fortune 500 publicly traded companies like Coca-Cola.
Right.
But luckily for most of us, there actually are millions of private companies that are SMEs, kind of small to mid-sized enterprises in this country at any given moment. And some of those smaller companies are startups, and they're high growth, venture backed, those kinds of startups. And those kinds of startups are interesting when you're thinking about pursuing a for-profit board career, because those startups are scaling. And so they're really going to be interested in building out advisory boards and filling those, finding independent directors at some point on the near horizon. And so that means there's opportunities connected to those companies. And then also they're lottery tickets, because, a venture-backed scaling startup, if it becomes very successful and large, then, your board career gets to grow along with that company. But also, you're compensated with some equity in that company.
Right.
So, there's money there too. So that's one, in this world of SMEs where there's millions, and, if you Google this number, it's between 10 and 20 million. It's just, it's fluctuating numbers. It depends on a lot of things, but that's a lot of companies. Yeah. So some of them are going to be venture-backed startups, and that's a small sliver of those. But then you have a whole lot of companies that are kind of small to mid-size. They're not, venture-backed, but they're solid companies that are, that are employing people, hundreds of people, that are an important part of, the backbone of this economy. And those companies have boards, and those companies a lot of times are kind of underutilizing their board. But if those companies start to pull some other seats up to the table, and women get to sit at that table, then that's also an opportunity to really have an influence on so many small and mid-sized companies in this country that might not be sexy, high growth, famous startups we're talking about in the news, but those companies have policies that affect a lot of people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And a lot of times in a town near you. So you have, when I've attended the board training in places like that, I've heard just this litany of statistics that you have about women and boards and how companies perform and how few and those things like that. Can you just share a few of those with us so that our listeners can be as outraged and inspired as I was when I heard those statistics?
Yes, this is definitely one of my favorite topics. So love to speak on that. Okay. So one of the statistics love to talk about really focuses on just studies that McKinsey has done that's made it very, very clear that companies will outperform when it comes to profitability and just value that the company puts out in the world if it has more diversity at the leadership level. So meaning at the board level and at the executive team level. And then conversely, companies that have less diversity at the leadership level end up performing significantly worse when it comes to profitability and, these other important markers for value that companies add to our economy. So if you just take one big step back, and we all agree that the economic case for diversity is real, that companies, these 10 to 20 million faceless, nameless companies would be doing better, would be making more money, would be hiring more workers, would be having better profits. All of that would be happening if there was more diversity at the top in these companies. So that's one. But then the reality is that the actual diversity, when it comes to private companies in America, it's actually unknown largely because there's very little transparency. There's no regulatory framework that's requiring private companies to report on any of these demographics. But the studies that have happened, and there's only been a couple in recent years that have focused in this, Pandora's black box, but those studies have unearthed that the statistics are very bleak for what we can see. And these are the studies that are self-electing, volunteering in the study, and they tend to be larger companies. And so those larger companies probably are better than the smaller companies, according to Equilar and other sources that crunch these numbers and analyze it. But the few studies that have happened see that number of diverse board members is around 14%. And that's, women to men, 14%. And then that number drops so low when you're talking about women of color. In fact, they're in this particular study that I'm referencing that looked at demographics of private company boards, there were more men in the study named Dave or David than there were women of color.
I don't know whether to laugh or cry, Breen.
Right.
I really feel like, what in the world? So if if you would give me the links to, because I would love to link to those studies so that people can read them for themselves. I don't feel like my audience needs to hear this. What are the wonderful ways that companies perform better when there is more diversity?
Well, so I mean, there's so many different ways companies will perform better. I think in the McKinsey study in particular, what they were tracking, I mean, I think definitely sharing that link and being able to dive into the weeds of that study, it's very enlightening. Yeah. I think some big trends in all of these studies that have happened, women tend to make risk-adjusted decisions when they're at the leadership level. So whether they're sitting in a governance seat or they're senior executives, and that value for the company to actually have the risk-adjusted decision-making, that can pay back in spades. So when a company does not have that diversity, then when there's conflict, when there's moments like high crisis moments, they're not getting a risk-adjusted, decision-making process. So those companies, in the aggregate overall, they're suffering, and that affects the economic bottom line. So that's one. There's, studies that really dive into that. There's also, the characteristics that women have that are, typically, right, on a spectrum, that women will tend to have certain characteristics, and men will have less of those characteristics. And when you have balance and you have the full mix, then you end up having, there's just better collaboration. So, better productivity. And there's studies that talk about that. Another statistic I didn't hit on, but I think is really important and really relevant to why we are doing what we are doing, and why the pipeline, it's so hard for women to get in that candidate pipeline and secure their place, because a lot of times you have to have had some board experience in order to secure your place in that pipeline. Right. So how do women get in and secure their place in the pipeline if there's very few opportunities and they're hard to find and they're not aggregated anywhere? And, it's only these few companies that hire recruiters to help you find them. And so the statistic that's really relevant for that, it's that out of all the board opportunities that do in fact exist right now, only 15% of them, whether it's public companies or it's private companies, 15% of those opportunities go to a recruiter to fill. And 85% or more, because in the private sector, it's probably way more than 85%, are filled entirely through, this tap on the shoulder.
Somebody's buddies.
Whoever's, close by. Yeah. And so on the one hand, we're trying to be that golf course, right? So all of these companies now, the 85%, 90% of these companies, instead of just tapping their buddy, they can tap their buddy, but they can also list it here in the fourth floor. That's one big thing. And then the other point I want to make is that I think the biggest headline is that so many of those companies, they actually could have way more board opportunities than they do have. Yeah. So that is a shift in thinking. It's true. And that's not easy. And that's, so like you're asking, what is the journey when someone comes to the fourth floor? Well, the candidate journey, I described that, but that's one side. And, the other side at the fourth floor is the company, because we're a two-sided marketplace. The companies come on the one side and the candidates come in the other. And in fact, we have companies send us their senior women to be candidates on the other side. But companies need to, I would say that the biggest hurdle for the fourth floor to drive real systemic change is kind of insinuating ourselves into all of these companies. These 10 to 20 million companies need to think a little differently, see the opportunity, the missed opportunity, in not making use of their corporate advisory board fully, or not making use of observer seats in the boardroom. We want companies to wake up and see that.
Well, and do I recall correctly that they're not even using all of the seats on the board? Like some of them have empty seats on them?
Right. So it's like kind of three levels of things. Like one is that, they have unfilled seats just opportunities that do exist, but are, unclaimed,
Yeah.
unfilled, not getting value out of them. But
Mm-hmm.
then there's even the next layer, which is the company itself may not have internally made a decision
Mm-hmm.
to populate its board to the full extent that it could, or to have a corporate advisory board.
Mm-hmm.
These are choices that many of these companies could, have the
Sure.
ability to wake up one day and decide, okay, I want to expand my corporate advisory board. I want to
Yeah.
create a new advisory board. I want to add a couple of additional advisors to this
Mm-hmm.
existing. I
Mm-hmm.
want to negotiate to make sure I have observer seats that I'm allowed to allocate to people that I'm interested in having at the table in my governing board meetings, even though those people won't have a vote and those people aren't compensated. That still can be a powerful tool for the company to have independent people sitting around the table, but also it's a really valuable bit of experience for the women who end up landing those seats. And that is still diversity at the board
Yeah.
level for that
Exactly.
company. So there's still risk adjusted decision making happening in that room.
Mm-hmm.
So we want companies to not only fill the empty seats that exist right now, we want companies to create additional seats and then fill them. And we think we can do that at the fourth floor.
Awesome. I think so too. So can you talk a little bit about the difference between a governing board, governance board, and an advisory board?
Yes, absolutely. So a governing board, the really big difference between the two is that a governing board, any of those directors that sit around the table have a fiduciary duty to the shareholders of the corporation. So to the corporation, which
Mm-hmm.
may or may not be the management team.
Mm-hmm.
Also, it is a next level relationship. It is formalized. It depends on the formation documents of that particular company, that what exactly the scope or the length, the duration of their term is. There's, it can be an arduous process to separate, to wind down the relationship. There's power dynamics at play. There's a sitting corporate director is able to vote, and they have power and influence over what the company does, and oftentimes who serves as the management team. Now, all of this depends on the ownership structure within the corporation. So, one thing we do talk about at the fourth floor, because we have a lot of earlier stage companies today. Now, that being said, we are 100% adding companies all the time that are larger and larger. And our goal is to have not only startups, high growth startups, but also all the way up to large private companies.
Mm-hmm.
But even smaller stage companies, if they're thinking strategically about their governing fiduciary boards, and the founder or the founding team has ownership of almost all of the common stock, then those director seats can be given to individuals where, yes, those individuals still have the fiduciary duty to the corporation, but it can have strategic benefit to the founding team. So there's some nuance there. I know that was maybe a bit in the weeds, but I think the big takeaway is that when it's a governing board, there's this fiduciary duty, which is an obligation not to the individual, but to the company. It's necessary to have D&O insurance in place. The
Mm-hmm.
company needs to be far enough along that, they have an adequate D&O policy. You need to be comfortable and you're getting covered. There's different legal documents. A lot of the specifics of your directorship will be governed by that corporation and
Mm-hmm.
how it's formed. An advisory board, totally different. It's a contractual relationship, no fiduciary duty. So this is one of the reasons why we love these positions and really advocate to have a lot of them and help women take advantage of them,
Mm-hmm.
because you might say you're a corporate executive and your company has conflict of interest policies that you need to be careful of when you're thinking about board service. Advisory boards, a lot of times, are the loophole because you don't have that fiduciary duty. So therefore, these conflict of interest policies aren't going to be problematic for you when you're looking to serve on an advisory board. It's a
Mm-hmm.
contractual relationship, meaning that you are an advisor.
Mm-hmm.
That company is hiring you essentially in the capacity as an advisor. I mean, there's many different ways to draft an advisor agreement, but I would say some of the most standard ways are to spell out what the services, performances, expectations are over a period of time, where an equity grant is given, and then that equity grant vests, over that period of time. And so it's a really nice arrangement for the company, because if the company feels like, okay, I'm not actually making use of this advisor, or this advisory board member is not delivering, then the company could simply, stop that vesting schedule and replace that advisor with an advisor that was able to perform. And then on the advisor side, right, if you're the candidate, it's also that same flexibility is really nice, because you're not married forever to a company. There, you can get out of the relationship if there are reasons why you're no longer interested in serving in that capacity, but you are typically accruing equity. So you have a vested interest in that company being successful, so you can share in it. And then I guess another thing I would say about this is that when you are an advisory board member, that's a great opportunity to kind of become part of a deep bench of potential director candidates if that company grows and has funding rounds and then is looking to fill independent director seats, right. Or you might be able to ask to be an observer. So I think that's another thing. And then sorry.
Go ahead.
I realize my answer is very long, but I didn't talk at all about the the actual types of skills that are demanded, or like what is the difference between serving as a director and governing versus serving as an advisor and essentially assisting the management team operate. And so just very quickly about that, I think that kind of sums it up. But when you are an advisory board member, you're being tapped to fill a skill gap, to help connect that management team to particular communities or networks or people, or maybe help them secure some type of a contract that can really make the difference for the company. A lot of times it is skill gap or community network specific, and then on the governing side, it tends to be it's a different skill set. You're really you're helping that company make those risk adjusted decisions. You're nose in, hands out. You're advising, you are not operating. So there tends to then also be a different set of skills and less about one specific gap or need that you can fill.
Just to bring in a kind of an odd example, it reminds me when people go on Shark Tank and they bring in one of the sharks, what kind of role are they expecting that person to fulfill? So sometimes they just want the funding, but really what they want is the access to that person's network and the kind of the acumen that they bring, right?
Right. No, absolutely. I mean, that's a great example. So, and there's lots of different ways to do it. There isn't one right or wrong way. And I think one of the things about boards just in general is that they've kind of been shrouded in mystery, and people have been confused about them. People get nervous and they don't really know what they don't know. But, at the end of the day, it is not rocket science, and there isn't one right way or one wrong way. People do it differently. Companies will, and candidates, they end up figuring out what is the right mix for them. And sometimes it is writing an angel check to a startup and then serving as an advisor. And sometimes you're an advisor and it's very loosey-goosey, and it's not written out the services expectations. Maybe you have an equity grant, but it's really more about the investment you're making in that company. And then you're really, you have skin in the game. You want that company to succeed because now you've invested in it. So you're kind of an advisor by default. It might look like that. So we call that angel advisor in the fourth floor. We actually kind of have a separate category for it, and we pull out those opportunities to help those people find each other. But that's one way. It could be that you're not writing an angel check. You are an advisor, and it is a bit more structured, and you are really kind of filling this gap that company doesn't have when it's early stage and it's scaling. And it's a win-win for both sides, because you're adding this value that otherwise would not be accessible to them until much later stage in their maturity.
Totally. No, my audience are mostly ex-corporate consultants, so they'll have come from a variety of different backgrounds. But some of the people that we're talking about, or the potential companies that they would be matched with, are like might be their clients too. So how would you contrast, like, and compare and contrast, like what a consultant would do versus what a board member would do, and why would they want to be on a board as opposed to just kind of like find consulting engagements?
Right. Okay. So I think that's a great question. There is one version of an advisor agreement that I personally have used and like, that incorporates an independent consultant attachment agreement to the advisor agreement. So you can absolutely sort of marry the two. So say you are a consultant, you're interested in, but you want kind of that next level relationship with that startup because maybe you really believe it's going somewhere. And sure, you would love to provide some of your consulting services to that client. And maybe you even have, this addendum where it lists out those services and you're getting paid for those services that you're providing. But then you also want to be their advisor. You want to go beyond those, discrete consulting services you're going to provide that startup. You're going to, have whatever you agree with that founder is reasonable. You're going to make yourself accessible a certain amount over the course of the year. You have relationships and networks and, special skill, your own special sauce you can tap into to really help that company just above and beyond this kind of consultant relationship you might have with a company. I think it can help you in terms of your own candidacy to sit on boards and larger company boards, as you progress. And I think then also you're earning hopefully some equity in connection with that advisor part of the agreement that you would not be entitled to as a consultant. So that is a longer term relationship. And of course, if it's a company that's cash poor, but you really believe in that company and you want to provide those services anyway, then that can be a win-win as well.
Sure. So there's plenty of famous examples of people going into companies when they were just a gleam in someone's eye and being spokesperson, and then now they're writing the equity from that. So I have seen several examples with my clients and with me of going in for a kind of a sliver, so like sales consulting or something very niche, and then doing well like with the founders and really wanting to contribute to like the larger organization and taking either partial payment in equity, full payment in equity, or some combination of that, and really staying and being involved with the company itself. And if I fall in love with all my clients and think about doing that with almost all of them. And realistically, I think this is a very specific situation. So what are the best ways for your candidates to select or to decide like what they like? You've mentioned the profile that they fill out. Like, how do they know what's going to be a good fit, and how do they kind of test drive it before they get into something that maybe they won't like? Like, if they haven't done this before, how do they figure that out?
Right. Okay. Love that question. So we like to say at the fourth floor, we do it the way a woman would do it. So we believe in dating before you go study, and we believe in going study before you get married. Good. And so we kind of like we ease into it. We have a relationship matrix. This is literally a resource available in our resource center, and we also hand this out, and we hand out all the other relevant documents and resources at our board boot camp. For any board candidate who's getting started, they come to that board boot camp, and they're getting this packet of materials. Inside those materials, there is this relationship matrix, which really spells it out how we see it. This you can kind of get to know a CEO and founder of a company, put yourself out there as a mentor sponsor, get a sense of where it feels right on both sides. Maybe you're graduating that to an advisor relationship in 3 to 6 months. Maybe you're ready for the advisor relationship right off the bat. So you're performing these searches and filters in our board marketplace to whittle down by industry and by other filters and criteria to find your targets. And then you're reaching out to those founders, and you're really, kind of putting yourself out there right off the bat at this advisor level. Maybe you see some of them have an open independent director seat. It's probably going to take a little while to get to know them before both of you would know whether that makes sense, because that's a big relationship. You can't rush into it. So I guess like coming to the board boot camp and getting the overview of the landscape as we see it, and getting that common syntax with the 800 companies that are building out their boards, then going into the board marketplace, running searches, using the filters, finding, after you've come to board boot camp and you've done the workbook and the exercises and you've asked yourself, what are my strengths? Where's my elevator pitch? Where's my kind of, where's the world where I would bring the most value? Because, maybe you're a CFO, you consult with kind of, outsourced CFO skills. Okay, well, now this is your realm. And maybe you have a background in health tech. Okay, so now you're really focusing on like health tech industry, but the specific skills you're bringing to the table relate to, finance, CFO skills, and you're kind of whittling it down that way. And then you have a better sense of what you would put out there as this is your value add. Like, why would the CEO call you when there's a problem? So you get your own sense of, what makes you very special. And so then as a candidate, once you've filled out your profile, yes, but you've come to this board boot camp, you've done these worksheets, you really have your own candidate identity, like front and center and ready to go. You have a sense of this relationship matrix. Then, you should feel, I think, pretty empowered. Even if you don't feel like you have a perfect board resume, that's the least of it. Like, you should feel empowered at that point to be able to start having an open dialogue with any of these companies where, they're in your target, and start to, get a sense of like how to progress that relationship forward. And I guess the other thing I'd say is that we've worked very hard to leverage AI and to have a platform where it can be automatic too. So you don't have to log in and run these searches. It's enough that once you kind of self-educate, and again, can't emphasize, really important to read the resources, come to board bootcamp. But once you really know who you are and you've built out your profile and you've set your preferences, you can sit back and the algorithm in the back will identify opportunities that look like they might be a good match for you. And you can take that as, a starting point.
Love it. Love it. So can you share some stories of members who have gotten positions or anything that they've reported back, like what kind of challenges they've worked on, or, a little of the kind of the human side of the fourth floor?
Sure. Yes. And okay, well, one thing we've heard a lot. So we've heard of candidates who have gotten to know founders, started off as an advisor, and then have filled a director seat. So making that leap from advisor to director, that has happened numerous times. We have also heard, so this is another really common trend, is the investing. So whether it happens, first that the primary interest in the founder is investing, because we have an investment club, which I don't even think I mentioned, but a subset of our candidates who are accredited investors who are interested in angel investing, they can join this club. And then that unlocks the ability for them to see the founders who are fundraising. And also it enables them to access those angel advisor roles that the other candidates can't access. So it's kind of like a reason to join that backroom investment club. But that's another thing we've just seen a lot, where it's either the candidate is in fact, first talking to the founder as an investor, and then that angel relationship kind of, evolves into this angel advisor or advisor relationship. And then, the other thing is first joining as an advisor and then becoming an investor. So I just like, it's very difficult to separate those two. And that is why we have an investment club in the first place.
Right. Of course. And then what are some of the board challenges that your members have experienced when they've gone and done things? I mean, is it seeking more diversity and bringing in their buddies, or are they business challenges that they've been working on?
Well, I have heard, like, for instance, we did have one candidate who ended up joining the board of an ecosystem company, and then that company went through hard times, and that company had to essentially kind of wind down. And so that was not what the candidate thought.
Right. But that is real business. That's actually what happens sometimes. So,
but it happens. And you know what? It's amazing experience. It's not, it's not fun, but that is actually a wonderful learning experience. So, and there was kind of these unforeseen things like that have happened that we have heard about. Challenges, I think, for the companies themselves, I guess we haven't heard of, I think maybe because we have this relationship matrix approach and we really encourage both sides to get to know each other first and kind of test the waters and make sure it's good. We haven't had stories of someone joining and then it really doesn't work out and people are upset about it. Now, we have heard, I think sometimes there can be, on the candidate side, like if you are easing into the relationship and then it doesn't progress like you might want it to progress. Sometimes I think candidates might feel frustrated by that, a little bit like, okay, I put myself out there, I invested some time and energy in this and it didn't work out. Yeah. And so, we hear that and that's not fun. But the thing I would say about that is that if you talk to, because, when I was a GC at these tech companies, I had all these male colleagues and these male colleagues, they were doing this. They were serving on these, what I thought of as baby boards. They were serving on them. And I think, and if you talk to those guys, they'll tell you, like, they've had lots of things where they're kind of, they're putting themselves out there. It's not clear if it's going to work out or they're going to get paid or it will happen. And they're kind of jumping in, taking the risk, like, kind of putting in the effort and then it ends up working out and they have access and they build this career. And I think women, and I don't mean this to sound, I don't want to be critical, but I think sometimes we focus too much on the publicly traded companies, those Fortune 500 boards. We think I'm so smart. I've worked so hard. I deserve like a real board seat. Like I want to be paid $200,000 a year. I want equity and I want to be like, a board director of a big giant company. And that's great. And we should want that. But I think we might be a little quick to skip over. There is this whole kind of gymnastics that a lot of those, and including the men that then are sitting in those seats, they have gone through some of those gymnastics. And we just like, I think because there hasn't been a marketplace or a way to access those, there's no way to like get started doing the gymnastics. We don't think about it. It's not in our consciousness. So instead it's like, okay, you have all of these men sitting around the table, all of these big private companies. Well, women should be there.
Right.
But I don't think it's terrible that we also do some gymnastics first, even if it's just to give us our own confidence and peace of mind that, that we know how to do it. And like, it's okay. Like it's the most important thing is just getting started, getting going and starting to be on for-profit boards and, doing that first, then it really, I think like very quickly can give you the confidence. I mean, I've seen that too in a lot of candidates of just women who are so incredibly qualified, have incredible 30-year careers. Maybe they were a chief legal officer, a massive company, like incredible women, but not really totally sure would I make sense as an independent director for the, this mid-sized company. They don't really like, it's not totally obvious. Yeah. And actually like getting started, wherever it is, even if it is with an advisory board or a smaller company board, can just be like super reaffirming.
Yeah. Totally. I mean, and I feel like it's an awareness issue. Like we just don't know how this whole thing works because it's been done behind closed doors. And I think a lot of what you're doing is just like educating us in like the vocabulary, the process. Oh, that's how the process works. Oh, there's all these things that the men have been doing all this time that we didn't even know was happening. So I think it's really informative. And okay, so you're not on the board of Coca-Cola tomorrow, but here's all these things that you can have and ways that you can make an impact and elevate your career and maybe get equity in really good up and coming companies. Like all of these things that are really beneficial about that in the short term. I think we just don't know that there is that. It's why when I first heard about you, I was like, oh my gosh, there is that. And it's so fascinating and interesting. And the people that I've met through the fourth company, the fourth floor.co, I have had that reaction to of like, look at all these amazing women and holy cow, she came out of Google and she's out of, that kind of thing. It has been really informative to be aware that there is a that. That's to me one of the biggest services that you're providing, whether anybody's on a board out of here or not. It's just like, look at what we can do when you see a need in the market.
Oh my gosh, thank you for saying that. I just couldn't agree with you more. So, and that's absolutely, I think just having this conversation that was so much of the mission in the beginning. And yes, we are doing that. We've done that. Like, we've kind of brought this in front of everyone's face. So, so I'm totally agree. And because of that mystery that we didn't need to be surrounding boards, and because of this utter lack of transparency, where there's no reporting requirement, companies are not, right now they're not being shamed, because they're not reporting it. But there's a trend and the trend is the other direction. So, whether it's NASDAQ requiring companies to diversify or they can't list, and the SEC back that, or it's Goldman Sachs not wanting to take companies public unless they have at least 2 diverse directors. The laws in California that, of course, were overturned, but still, like, they'll be back, I'm sure. And, really, it still sparked a lot of change for companies. So I think there is, and it's not just in the US, globally, right. Everyone else ahead of us. So they have all of these quotas in place. So that, in the near future, we will have transparency. We will have reporting requirements. We will have quotas. Like, all of that's going to happen. And so that's why this is so important, because the women who get involved here and who know how the sausage is made and who are doing the gymnastics and are getting on these boards, that it's just way ahead of the curve for when there's this explosive need for, all of the bigger companies to set women on those boards.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a carrot and a stick approach. And obviously the quotas are the stick approach. But I feel like the carrot is, for heaven's sake, these companies are performing better. And don't you also want to perform better? If it were me and I were running a company, I'd be like looking around and saying, it seems like there's something to this. And I don't know exactly what it is, but I'm willing to try it out. And like, what happens if we did bring in more women? What happens if we did bring in more people of color? And then I think they're going to notice the things that are obvious to you and me about what that means. And then hopefully that would lead to a different kind of trend. And I think it's all just a matter of time on these things. As as you said, like, sometimes when we look to Europe, we see our future in these things. So it can go differently. And I love the resource that you're providing. So if somebody is like, whoa, cool, I'm interested, then where can they go to find out more about you and the all of the services that you provide and the fourth floor?
Yes. Well, thank you so much. So our website, thefourthfloor.co. That is the best place to come to find us. We're actually rebranding in the near future to The Fourth Effect. So thefourtheffect.com will get you there as well. But so if you search for The Fourth Floor, you might see The Fourth Effect. That's us. And our website, as an individual or a company, you can join. So companies can just join straight away. As an individual, you have to apply. You can also come to a platform tour. You can sign up on our website. It's front and center. We do them every Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern time. And if you come to a tour and we know that you meet our qualifications and you meet our qualifications to be a board candidate, you can skip the line and we'll give you a link and you can join immediately at that platform tour. And you can join as a board candidate, you can join as an investor, you can join as both a board candidate and an investor. And then we do have like a kind of dip your toes in the water option if you're not ready to commit to be a board candidate or be an investor, but you just want to be part of the community and access the resources. So, and then finally, companies, if you're listening to this and you have your own company, whether it's a consultancy or any company, companies are welcome to join as well. And if that company is interested in leveraging advisors or directors, then, obviously we're a great resource. If your company is fundraising and you're woman-led or BIPOC-led, we're a great resource. And corporates. So if you are a corporate executive, we would love nothing more than to have your company join us and pay for your membership. So essentially, when larger companies join the fourth floor, what that really means is that they're making the board candidate membership available to qualifying women as a professional development benefit. And then, of course, they can tap into our board marketplace if and when the need arises for them, which we hope it will. So if you think your company falls into this profile, then please just reach out to us on our website. It's easy to do that, and we'll send you the materials that you can share with your employer.
Awesome. Love it. Love it. And I'm a member and I think it's great. So join me in there. And I just got an idea for a client that I'm working with that needs to come in there. So it's been super fun to talk with you, Breen. I am so motivated to elevate women in general. And I think being on boards and having more of a say-so in what companies, even smaller size companies, are doing is a great way for women to have more power and to make more of an impact. So thank you so much for talking with me about that.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.